Wow, thanks everyone. Awesome. Great intro. Yeah, so I tried to come up with a title for this talk, and it's Survival in the Age of Agents. It's basically, you could say, a tour of what's going on in Sean's head here as we stand at the cusp of this age of AI. I'm CEO, as John said, and co-founder of Jentic, where we're building infrastructure for agents to work across the universe of APIs in the world. And I'm on the AI Advisory Council, which gives me a different, high-level, slightly more political perspective on the whole thing. But mostly, I've been building through technology for multiple waves now. Like, at the start with Demaware, actually before that, I was there with Ronan at the start of Forest, before SaaS was even a word. And then I co-founded Demaware in 2003, which was infrastructure, actually low-level netcode, and then infrastructure for video games before cloud was a thing, and before Call of Duty became one of the biggest games in the world. And that was tons of fun. Then later did a ton more SaaS, and then various media things. And then I did one of those detours into the world of ad tech for 6 years. And broadly, I've seen these cycles come and go. And the main thing is that's relevant right now today is that just because something's massively overhyped doesn't mean it's not real. Right? The transformation is real, in my view. At Jentic today, our engineers aren't coding anymore. I don't know how true that is for the rest of you, but for us, it's basically all code. People are dropping only into code for debugging and review. The coding is the machine's job now, and all of the humans are up at architecture and systems design. And the new bleeding edge is figuring out how to combine AI with maybe agile software engineering practices. Maybe some of you have heard of BMAD, which is the latest thing in the last 3 weeks. And coming up with multi-agent architectures, which you could say are practicing software engineering practices with each other. And in a very weird, surprising turn of events, waterfall software engineering is back in vogue, just happening at much faster iteration, spec-driven upfront development. So we're here at this time realizing that, when AI is generating code basically from spec to implementation in minutes, agile feels kind of wrong. It actually just feels a little bit human-paced. More evidence things aren't right is the job market has got super weird. Computer science grads aren't getting jobs at the moment. Law firms have cut intake. Big tech is basically openly talking about AI-related layoffs. It's not COVID anymore. And we're not even 3 years into this thing. It's just not business as usual. So I took a bit of a journey towards this. Post-COVID, I jumped into Dogpatch Labs, which some of you might know, right? Co-working space. I was an entrepreneur in residence there. Basically, that means I got to work with other startups while trying to figure out my own next gig. So this is like late 2022, ChatGPT had happened, so I'm working with the startups and I'm playing with ChatGPT at night and pondering the consequences of all of this. And I realized that the implication of AI isn't just that we get co-pilots helping us write code and help us draft our emails, but that pretty soon it's going to be doing the actual work, calling the APIs rather than telling us to press the buttons. And I kept on pulling at that thread. These agents have the power to displace the work that we do as humans one task at a time, at least, and then one workflow at a time, at least. But as they do so, they don't just make people, let's say, less busy, but they also replace the software that those people used to need to use to do that work, right? One SaaS app at a time. Because AI doesn't need a React user interface to use a database. It just uses the database. And so SaaS is dead. It's fundamentally the argument for that. There's a few other angles to it, but that's one of them. Right, so this is I'm a software engineer. I guess a lot of you guys are as well. So it's a series of existential crises for people like us when you realize this kind of thing. First is the realization that AI replaces a lot of this software, then is the realization that it's going to probably write a lot of new software. Maybe on the fly, maybe single-use software. You actually already see this in things like Claude when you ask it a question. So in this world, how much software do you still need? What's a software entrepreneur like me, or maybe some of you, to do? Right? In my case, sitting there in Dogpatch and looking around, I realized that I had to immediately start a company called after agents, so Jentic, and jump into it head first and try to survive. So at Jentic, just to explain it briefly, we're trying to connect agents into APIs. Right? So agents in business, we think, operate at the API level. Right? So first of all, you have to connect them, and then you have to help them get the business logic right. Right? And we think that's the way that's going to work. You could say that's an old-fashioned kind of problem. Right? It's integration layer stuff. But with AI, it's got a new kind of solution. This is why we think there's a business here. Basically, integration used to be solved with code, but if it's AI, you really solve it with knowledge. Right? Or in really simple, plain terms, if I get less highfalutin, it's if you want AI to use an API accurately, you just got to give it the docs. Right? With the docs, it gets it right first time. Give it an open API spec, it'll do the rest command, it won't screw it up. Right? So it turns into a knowledge management problem from a code problem, which means the stack looks basically totally different if you play that out. So that's what we're doing. Yeah, so I thought, yeah, there's a business here. I managed to recruit a kick-ass co-founding team, Michael Corden, who we're speaking later, and Dorothy Craven. And then we raised a ridiculous sum of money for Ireland, given there was just 3 of us in a Google Doc. And then we started hiring an amazing team. And that's about a year ago. So we're steeped in this space of agents for about a year, which is about a decade in AI time. And some of the things we've discovered along the way have surprised even us, and I think are still a bit controversial. So we'll talk about a few of those. So first, like this is when I was fundraising last year, I realized, talking to like 100 investors, that a lot of them are saying, you know, yeah, SaaS is dead, but it's not a big deal because we're going to replace it with agents as a service on a one-to-one basis, right? So literally people were saying the future is full of ass. And well, it's cute and stuff, but like I think it actually looks quite a lot different to that. Agents are problem solvers. They're quite general purpose, actually, right? So you take a coder agent, it's one that's most familiar to most of us, I think, like Claude or Cursor or something like this, right? It comes out of the box tooled up for coding. It's got grep or sed or diff or basically equivalent tools like that, and then you let it rip and it can do code. But if you ask it, it'll actually do other stuff for you as well, right? You can get it to write legal documents. Right? You can get it to do a financial analysis. You can get it to look at a shareholder document and write an addendum for you. I've even figured out how to get it to unit test legal documents, which is a cool thing, right? You can get it to do a blog post. And if you start giving it tools, like you start adding in MCP tools, or maybe you can just give it some open API docs in the folder and tell it to use curl, it will start trying to use APIs as well to do basically whatever you ask it to. Right? So these are actually general purpose things. And coder agents, all that we use them for coding, they're general purpose, but there's other things, like Manus is another agent that's maybe getting a bit popular now, certainly very well funded, which is a general purpose business agent. And we have, I guess, browser agents as a category now, like Perplexity Orbit, ChatGPT agent, something called Fellow. And these are basically self-driving browsers that go around the web for you, doing your work. But they're all, my point is these are general purpose pieces of software. When you actually get in under the hood, it's surprising how little code there can be in there. From our point of view, we're mostly dealing with API agents, right? Quite powerful. And we actually just open sourced a library called Standard Agent to make it as boring as possible, to show how simple this can be. That library is a general purpose agent that operates against APIs, and it's 824 lines of code last time I looked at it. Right? And this is, like, it's small, by the way. It's just basically gluing an LLM together with a tool set. Right? So if you have a tool set like Jentic, it's not a lot of code. Right? And this kind of thing, it can replace a lot of software. Right? It's a small piece of code, and you can take it, and you can, there's a lot of software you don't need when you have one of these. So let's take an example. Let's say you are a business and you need some kind of rostering system, right, kind of time-off system. And previously, you would have had to go and license some SaaS, or maybe, if you're adventurous, you try and write your own. But if you have an agent like this, you hook it up to some things, like maybe a spreadsheet, a database, Slack, an email, and it can just sit there, receiving requests for time off, looking at who else has time off, seeing if there's any conflicts, getting in touch with someone on Slack to get permission from the manager, approving it, emailing people. Just sit there working, right? One generic piece of code, right? That's a whole piece of software that didn't need to exist, and a whole category of SaaS that doesn't need to happen anymore. And you can run this yourself, but I think basically pretty soon we're going to see inside Google Docs or your G Drive, these things are going to pop up, right? And Google's already given demos of those, general purpose agents. So they replace huge swathes of tasks, workflows, potentially employees, and all the software stack that's sat under that over time. It's radical, it's very different. Our ambitions in this our realization of the scope of this maybe has increased a bit over the last year, maybe because I get to talk with Silicon Valley investors who think like this. But maybe it goes further than just replacing the people and the workflows, scary enough as that is. Maybe it replaces the businesses themselves. So if you unpack a business, what's really in there except some kind of data infrastructure, some business logic that sits on top of that, of how to use that, and a bank account. So if you can extract that business logic out of there and put it in some common format and give it to an agent, what's left? Just APIs and a bank account, right? So this could bring us into some very interesting places. This train of thought, this is still me pulling this thread over the last year of where it takes us. It brings us to the concept of what an AI native business might actually look like. I was struggling with this actually late last year, basically post-funding, and maybe for the first 3 or 4 months of this year, because I knew that we had to be an AI native company, but I just didn't know what the hell that was. Right? If we weren't an AI native company, we're probably going to get killed by one. So it was a matter of urgency to try to work this out. I talked with lots of entrepreneurs and other people and our co-founders, and we really tried to figure it out. And I think I know what it is now. I think a good definition of the AI native company is that it is itself going to be an AI system, right? It might be like a collection of systems. It might be what you might call a multi-agent system, all hanging together doing the business of the company. That's software, support, finance, fundraising, right? Whatever you have. And that, it will be doing all the work of the company. There will be people hanging out. There will be some employees, but they're actually the robot maintenance crew. They're not there to do the actual work. That our function in that scenario is to build that robot, improve it, maybe govern it, but never actually get involved in doing the actual work, right? And that's a fundamentally different kind of company. It'll have new kinds of dynamics. Like, for example, the workforce doesn't have to scale with the demand of the customers, right? And I think another critical thing that changes in that kind of company is, well, in the future that company exists in, labor has collapsed as a fundamental pillar of our economy, right? So if you've got your spot on a robot maintenance crew, you're really going to want to make sure you have a share in that robot. Right, so employee ownership of this will become very important. I'm picturing small companies, small people running very scalable AI systems, solving some problem, and all those people have high ownership in that. Right? And I think that's the kind of company that I think that's the company of the future. So that's the kind of company that we have to try to build Jentic into, seeing as we're starting from zero today. Let's see. I'll just try and pick up my train of thought here. Yeah, so this, the next question, right? I'm trying to think about this from our employees' point of view as well as, and our point of view. How do you get onto that kind of robot maintenance crew in the future? What qualities, who earns a spot? And if labor is collapsed and we all still want to have jobs, what can we bring to it? We need to somehow maintain an edge above the AI, above what you can just ask ChatGPT to do in order to basically be accretive to the process. How many people here can remember back when Big Blue bet Kasparov in, I think, late 90s or something? Yeah? Okay, not that many. That makes me feel old, but some of us. Right? And what I remember, I was just in college at the time, but there was serious social convulsions around this idea that a computer just bet the best human in the world at chess, because that was supposed to be the hallmark of intelligence. Right? But as soon as it happened, we got over our convulsions and we retreated a bit and we said, chess isn't such a big deal. That's not real intelligence. And we went on for a while. Um, let's see, it was maybe 10 years later when Watson bet or won at Jeopardy, right? And that was another like major moment where we thought, holy cow, like it's better at general purpose problem solving or like general purpose questions as well, right? But we got over it and we thought, you know what, we have like something a bit more, you know, we were into the higher level thinking, right? And I think it was roughly, I think that was around 2007, so roughly 10 years later again when AI bet Lise Sedol at AlphaGo won at Go, right? So there's an interesting 10-year cycle there, right? So then it won at that. And we kind of redrew the borders of what we considered intelligence a little bit again, right? And more recently, like just 3 years ago, AI started generating sonnets and music and art. And a lot of people are still like still trying to gerrymander the definition of intelligence. This is critical. We've got to know like, what is the human intelligence that we bring to the equation if we want to like earn our place in the robot maintenance crew? Right now, there's a lot of people out there who will argue that the whole of AI is just a statistical trick. That I think Noam Chomsky's phrase is that it's a stochastic parrot, and that next token prediction isn't real intelligence. I find this a little bit suspect because predicting the next token in a sentence actually is an incredible feat that kind of involves understanding the whole world and the whole universe. Right? So there's a really deep understanding required to predict the next token. But also, like, the position is of a lot of people that there's some ineffable true quality of human intelligence that the machine can never reach. Right? And that's like a fundamentally unfalsifiable position. So you have to get ready for bullshit when you hear that kind of thing. But where I'm at now is I do think currently there's things that humans are capable of doing that LLMs aren't. But simultaneously, there's a lot of people who've been coasting for decades, maybe hundreds or thousands of years, doing very little more than putting one plausible word after another. And AI and LLMs is really showing all of those people up. We want to get a place in the robot crew. We need to be able to do a lot more than just put one plausible word after another, because LLMs from now on are always going to beat humans at that task, at that kind of work. Right, and this is very bad news, I think, for a lot of people who live by frameworks, right? You know them, right? Frameworks from the MBA that they did, right? Frameworks they read in a book, and they bring these to work and they repeat them, right? Like, that's just one example. AI already knows all of the frameworks and can write faster than any of us, right? So that's an example of something we can't win at anymore. So where do we have the edge? Right? I'm not an LLMs expert or anything, so maybe you shouldn't believe what I'm saying, but this is my synthesis of what other people have been saying, I think, is that what they can't do is reason spatially. I think you can feel this if you're coding with them, for example, right? LLMs are fundamentally trained on one-dimensional data. We have evolved over millions of years in a three-dimensional environment, right? So we can reason spatially. Even little animals can reason spatially better than ChatGPT can attempt to. And this, this bleeds over into other areas as well, right? So when we're, for instance, we're coding, right? We feel like we can see the architecture, right? It's not like we're actually seeing it, but we kind of it feels like the same part of our brain is active. We can kind of see it. We can use that intuition about the connections between things. And we know that if we, touch this bit over here, it's probably going to have a ramification on these things. And we can kind of feel that like it's in an invisible way going to affect this other component over there, right? So we have that picture. I feel like palpably when I'm working with a coder agent, it clearly does not have any mental model of what the hell is going on. It's just putting one line after another, right? So that's something we can do, right? We can see that mental architecture. And so that's one thing. I've only got one other thing that I think we might have an advantage on. So does anyone, I have a friend and an advisor in the company, Mark Cummins, right? He's a successful Irish entrepreneur and quite a deep thinker on this kind of stuff. He wrote a blog post on what he calls System 3 thinking. So this is extending the idea of the book Thinking Fast and Slow. Right, so it's a very famous book. Maybe some of you have read it, by Kahneman and Tversky. And just to recap it briefly, it points out that System one thinking is that reflexive thinking that we have, just that intuition. Like I say cloud and you'll say rain, right? Because we're in Ireland, of course, right? And system two thinking is like the more deliberate, logical thought that we can do. Like if I ask you to do a sum, like 83 multiplied by 7, you'll probably have to stop and think that one through, right? So we can compare LLMs to this in many ways. Like a bare LLM is the system one thinker, right? It just gives you hot takes. A thinking model layers chain of thought reasoning on top of an LLM, and it's kind of an approximation for system two thinking, although fundamentally in one dimension, not in multiple dimensions like us. Now, system three thinking, the idea there is it's those eureka moments, right? Those intuitive leaps that we sometimes have. It's not like we have them every day, or at least I don't, but I've had a couple in my lifetime. And this allows us to reason laterally, right? I don't think we really understand what's going on there. Sometimes it takes a month, or weeks, months, right? You're thinking about it, you're going for walks, thinking about it, talking about it to friends, maybe even sleeping on it. And one day you wake up and it's obvious. We don't see that kind of thing happening with LLMs at the moment, right? They basically gradually get to they go token by token, right? There aren't any major leaps happening. Right? I think a decent comparison to illustrate this is like, so it's 2025. What if 110 years ago, like when Einstein was working on his theories, right? There were LLMs. Like, there's no chance, I think, that any LLM could have made the same leap. That gravity is actually just our subjective experience of taking a shortest distance path through a space-time field warped by mass, right? There's no chance that an LLM could get from there, from where it was to that conclusion, right? It's not the kind of thing that they're capable of doing. So the good news is, humans still have an edge. We just have to try to reason like Einstein, right? Maybe not quite up to that level, but we have to raise ourselves above putting one word after another or thinking linearly through verbiage, basically. We have to make space for us to build these mental architectures in our heads and dwell and to wallow in them and to try to get ourselves into a position where we can make these leaps. So this gets us into, I think this idea of context engineering, but context engineering for humans. We've learned over the last couple of years using LLMs that if you want good results, you have to curate the context, right? Be very careful about what you put in there. Not just to make it well-informed when it's answering the question, but to kind of focus its attention on the parts of the problem where you want it to apply its form of intelligence. I think that now as humans, if we want to get to the same level, we have to do ourselves at least the same favor, right? And be very careful about what we put into our heads and what we allow our brains to think about. We have to be conscious of this. Ways to do this. I suppose designing your days. Right? There's a collection of random thoughts, but design your days, think about your mental energy. How many good hours a day do you actually have and where can you place those? And try to actually protect that time so that you're putting that mental energy that you have to apply into the stuff that you actually intended to. Right? So what you read, what you watch, who you talk to, what you choose to do, this all affects the quality of it. It all affects the quality of your thinking over time. So that's about directing your energy a bit. Another failure, so as you can tell, I'm kind of trying to work this out myself, but another thing that gets in the way of making those big leaps, I think, is multitasking too much, at least for my brain. Right, so cognitively trashing between 2 or 3 or 4 different major tasks, never really getting the time to dwell and go deep enough on one of them to make a leap forward. Right, so that's another thing I'm beginning to get very conscious of. All right, and another one is just the internet itself. Right, the open web has always been full of junk. Not always, but for a very long time, clickbait, ad-fueled junk. So there's this new phrase, many of you will know, it's a technical term, right? It's called enshittification, right? The open web is largely enshittified by AI now, right? Lots and lots of blogs and forums and posts everywhere, just bland AI content that aren't really adding much, certainly nothing more than you could get in a direct conversation with AI, which would be a conversation that you're steering. Right? It's not just the open web though, right? For me, my experience is like social media as well. Like, so LinkedIn, I think, has turned a corner on this. Like, the humans, worse even, on LinkedIn, the humans are in on it, right? It's like real people posting AI-generated kind of fake plastic posts celebrating their latest work anniversary. Just big stream of this stuff. And all that LinkedIn mail, all that AI-generated LinkedIn mail has ramped up. And the posts are just, you know, I think, do you guys feel the same as me? I feel like I can see them from across the room at a distance, you know, and just squint and you just see the rocket emojis and M-dash spacing and all this stuff, right? LinkedIn, X's or Twitter or whatever is totally screwed as well. I've noticed YouTube turning the same corner, I think just in the last few weeks. Not totally turned the corner, but you know, I spend time on YouTube at night trying to learn about AI or whatever happened the previous day. And increasingly the feed is filling up with like AI voices reading an AI script on an AI-generated background or video of some type. You know, 5 things about Jaws you didn't know, or like normally stuff about movies. I'm like, totally outside of my AI filter bubble, except for the fact that they're generated by AI. And they often catch me, right? That's YouTube. I think TikTok is in the same position. I understand Pinterest, which is not a platform I'm on, but that it's long gone. Basically, you know, just pictures. You know, that was low-hanging fruit, so that's 90% AI. So that's just a wall of AI-generated slop hitting us from all sides. But I think it's actually far more pernicious than that. Well, first of all, humans are in on it, like all the content creators in many ways. But it's the algorithms, right? So we have this huge wall of infinite AI content being thrown at us, and we have these highly optimized ML algorithms optimizing those feeds, right? It's very hard to beat those algorithms, right? Trained at massive scale, basically trained against the human amygdala, right? So when you look at one of these feeds, it can grab you before you can be consciously like attentive to the fact that it's doing this to you. Yeah, I just find it a bit depressing. And so if you're getting like, you know, when you wake up 5 minutes later and you realize you're in some kind of bubble, some kind of world you didn't intend to be, that's apparently filled with, you know, millions of polarized humans debating something that seems to be more in the algorithm's interest than yours. Yeah, it's a depressing place to be. So I think if we want to rise above the machines, we have to like be very, very careful of basically engaging with any of that. It's one big mind trap for humans. Right? It's a mind trap that I kind of worked in this industry a little bit in a previous company. Would it even exist without advertising? Like this 24/7 mill of like AI-generated, ML-curated mind trap content trying to pull you into a vortex of online melodrama, right? That probably wouldn't be there if it wasn't for advertisers, right? We just can't be down there anymore. So that's, I've been talking a lot about the robot maintenance crew and our role there and so on. We're going to get a bit more political. There's a bigger picture. All of our companies are obviously exist in countries. And I'd like to talk about like the role of like where we are. We're in Dublin, Ireland, in Europe, in the world. I think definitely a realization of the last year is that like doing AI or being close to this, it's not just technology anymore. It's not a neutral thing. It's got into the realm of politics, right? AI is like technology, it's power, it's economics, it's hybrid warfare. With drones now, it's inverted actual physical warfare, right? It's when you're doing AI, you're definitely in the political realm now. It's a kind of new Manhattan Project that we're all being unwittingly like conscripted into. So what's the timeline here? Let's think about the timeline of the web, which I kind of started my career in the middle of, the start of like around 96. The web started, you might say 92 or something with the Mosaic browser, right? Like it took about 15 years to get from that first browser up to people buying stuff like on their iPhones on Amazon that they heard about in Facebook, right? Around like circa 2007, let's say, right? So on that 15-year timeline, what does our world look like? Thought experiment. What does it look like in 2037, which is 15 years from ChatGPT? Right? What scares me most is the economics of it. Right? I think AI is going to replace a lot of labor. right? As AI replaces labor, it reduces redistribution of wealth, right, which we all depend on, right, while simultaneously taking that capital and flowing it out of the economy in the form of API fees to AI companies. So in 2037, my number one fear is like, how are we going to actually keep, like, how is our economy going to keep us afloat? Like, where does that social net come from? How does UBI get funded? I think it's fair also to acknowledge that AI is going to produce huge productivity gains for companies. Right? It definitely will. But I see very little reason to think that's going to get shared around unless there's some kind of like forward thinking on this. And the shareholders of companies will probably do well, but where are the staff in the picture? And the shareholders of AI companies will probably do exceptionally well, especially the foundational AI companies. But most countries aren't going to have those companies in it. Like Ireland isn't on a path to have any of that here, for example. Right? And even more depressingly, it's occurred to me that what AI industry we have, right, not looking at ourselves here, of course, but what AI industry we do form could be viewed by an economist as just distribution for American AI. I think we really have to try to aim higher than that future. We're in a situation in Europe at the moment, there's been some studies of this, where I think we spend somewhere in the region of $300 billion a year in Europe on foreign tech infrastructure. This is like from the last wave, right? The wave that we largely missed. And AI is set to make this an awful lot worse, right? So it's time for us to try and find a way to get into the middle of the game. So let's see. Catching up on my internal script here. Okay, so I'll just like skip into my strong statements about energy here. I think, right? We actually have to find what cards we can actually play in Ireland. AI in so many ways resolves down to energy. Like the fundamental input is megawatts, and we do have some cards in that sense. At least until recently. Right. We have like a lot of interconnectors, global like data interconnectors running through Ireland into Europe. We have a pedigree in building data centers. Right. We already host like a huge chunk of the internet, actually a very outsized chunk of the internet in Ireland. We're second home to so many of the tech companies, American tech companies in the world already. And we have abundant wind energy. There should be a way for us to put this all together. We have a supply chain that's been building and operating data centers for a couple of decades, and we know how to do that. And we should be aiming for a chance to be a producer in this new economy, not just a consumer of basically foreign AI. But how do we do it? We're definitely behind on energy, appallingly so. We have a really deficient national grid. There's no clear vision at the moment of how to get through this. There's very little coordination across the different areas of government to build this energy infrastructure. I think we have a very outdated opposition to nuclear energy, especially as small nuclear reactors are emerging as possibly like an answer to climate change, basically. We have this planning quagmire going on, and we have literally no plan that I can get anyone to tell me about how to decarbonize this country. Our energy plan is wind backed up by gas. And that's where we are. Right. But AI craves clean energy. There should be a way through this. But unfortunately, we're in a position at the moment where wind farms in Mayo are discarding excess energy while Amazon pulls a $300 million investment into a data center in the M50, outside the M50, because it couldn't get an electricity connection. We should be welcoming this kind of investment. Right? The timeline, incidentally, someone explained to me, was a big data center 20 years ago was 2.5 megawatts. A big one in Ireland, like a big one in Ireland today, is I think 2,500 megawatts. I think that one was refused. That would be 5% of our total energy consumption, but someone wanted to do it. Right? And in I think the UAE, that person referred to a new data center being built that's 5 gigawatts, right? That's the total energy consumption of Ireland, right? We should have the ambition to bring that kind of investment here. Obviously, that's totally transformative, but this is the new industrial revolution, and we actually do have an advantage to try to bring an outsized portion of AI hosting into our economy, which would basically fix all of our economic woes for the future. We'd have the fundamentals of that supply chain hosted here. Okay, there's one other thing we could do, which is regulation. We are home to so many of these companies. We are a pragmatic and practical place to do business. We could be more pragmatic about regulation and business friendly. I want to be realistic about regulation. It's necessary. We all, I think, lived through the financial crash, but it's also a pain in the ass. None of us want poisonous food or another financial crash, but there's nuance to it. It's often a practical political tool. This is me learning my politics more recently, right? But it's seen often as a non-tariff trade barrier against other companies, right? It's this kind of dirty bare-knuckle fight of international diplomacy, and it's a tool to whack other people over the head with very often. And with regulations, we also get regulatory capture. It's very, very hard to avoid, where the incumbents often end up arguing for the regulation because it helps keep newcomers out of their market, right? This can even happen accidentally. Like, for example, GDPR, which I was deep in the middle of for a while. It was I think, a truly idealistic regulation to protect our privacy, right? But by many foreign companies, like American companies, they saw it as a non-tariff trade barrier to basically keep them out of Europe, right? So that's Facebook and Meta and so on hated it. But very, very strangely, when you look back at what actually happened, it massively advantaged those companies because their economies of scale and the amount of first-party data that they had on people, right? And it effectively fenced a lot of indigenous companies away from doing the kinds of things that those big giants could do. So you should be careful of regulation. It can have very unintended consequences. Let's see. Yeah, I might be running out of time, am I? Yeah, time to wrap. Let's see. So, yeah, regulation. That's the second part we should do. Be careful of them. We can be a friendly place for regulation. We can be pragmatic. We can recognize that in America, the companies are owned by, the government is largely owned by the companies at this point. In China, the companies are owned by the government. Both of those superpowers are at this global table, right? They have their politics and their companies, their finance and their banking all aligned, and they're going for this future economy, right? Europe wants to be at the table that America and China is at, but I'm afraid we're arguably not even in the room, and even worse, we possibly don't even recognize that we're not in the room. Instead, we're regulating, right? And we're bringing in the European EU AI Act at probably the very worst time. I'm not the first one to say this. There's a Draghi report, 1 year old, that's commissioned by the EU, on the EU, written by an EU, one of the biggest EU insiders. So you'd expect it to be favorable, but actually totally scathing of the EU, and paints a clear picture of an existential crisis and a fork in the road, points out that in the 1990s, Europe and America basically had the same GDP. Then America stormed ahead with digitization. And now Europe's buying American technology and doesn't have any new large companies of its own. And now it's about to happen again, and our response is the EU AI Act, right? Inscrutable, right? Highly punitive, very difficult to work with. We could be doing more. And I think that to do more, we need leadership, right? We need leadership from within, not just in our companies, to lean into AI, to recognize how transformative this is, to try to build AI-native companies that will survive into the next era, right? But to also to find leadership locally, leadership nationally that recognizes Ireland's place within the EU and the special cards we have to play, right? So that we can leverage those. And to look for leadership at the EU level that can recognize that maybe the game the EU is playing has to change, right? That the situation has changed and it has to read the global room a little bit and step up and try to implement the Draghi report, right? And that's European reform, right? I'm looking forward to that future, I hope, where we all get to be AI native companies in Ireland as an actual leader of AI in the world, in Europe that's actually at the table. Thank you.
Trying to rush you off now, Sean, or anything like that. Guys, thank you so much to Sean. There were so many golden nuggets that were dropped this morning, and And it's crazy to think that that's just our keynote opening speaker today. So I really hope that you're ready for really inspiring and thought-provoking discussions that will be taking place today. Our next speaker is Michelle McDade, and you're absolutely right. We were getting straight into it with our second speaker, who has accolades that are taller than me. She's also recently added to that accolade by completing her master's in work and organizational behavior from DCU. So before I even start with the rest of the intro, can we just give her a big round of applause, because that's a huge and fantastic achievement. So on top of being a role model and a mentor for women in tech, she's been recognized for her contributions to Ireland's tech sector, the visionary founder of The Leading Place. She's also recently launched the Leading Community in partnership with Sarah Mullally. So guys, if we could please give her a really warm, big ShipItCon welcome for an innovative leader with a passion for empowering not only businesses to create high-performing and positive workplaces, but also women in tech to thrive, to advocate for themselves, leaving a trail of success stories in her wake.